Are you ready to be hingeless? It's tier 4 time, baby. Last week we covered a bunch of theories in the conspiracy tier. We covered things like the fate of the Chosen One, whether or not a prison break was staged, and cleared the air surrounding New Vegas' Metacritic score. Today we'll be going over what I consider to be some unhinged aspects of New Vegas. I don't want to spoil anything too early, but I guarantee you'll learn something new today. Without further ado, let's get it started. Legion Child Soldiers. To be blunt, Kaiser's Legion is a brutal faction that uses merciless tactics and psychological warfare to combat their foes. One of the disturbing aspects of the Legion is its use of child soldiers, which is implied through various in-game narratives. When you explore the fort, the Legion's main base of operations in the Mojave, you can find children present in the area. These children are often seen running around and training. Their presence suggests that the Legion does not hesitate to involve young individuals in their Mojave subjugation attempts, even if not explicitly as frontline soldiers. Another example comes from Legate Lanius's backstory. Lanius, aka the Monster of the East, is a formidable military commander of the Legion. According to the commander of the Praetorian Guard, Lucius, Legate Lanius rose to the status of full legionary as a child at the age of 12. This proves that the Legion has recruited children into their military. And the final example comes from the mouth of an NCR Ranger veteran. Ranger Andy, found in Novak, shares a disturbing tale. A few years prior to the start of New Vegas, Andy led a team of Rangers to a burned-up building where some suspected Legion slavers were conducting business. However, when Andy's team arrived, the place proved to be mostly abandoned. Andy found a small, scrawny child hiding in a closet. As Andy attempted to pick up and save the child, the lad ran back into the closet, dropping a grenade at the feet of the Ranger. Although Andy would evidently survive the explosion, he would have to live with chronic problems with his arm and leg. The child's intent was to harm or kill Andy when he tried to help, showing the ruthless and manipulative nature of the Legion's tactics. These instances emphasize the brutal methods employed by the Legion, including the recruitment and use of children for military purposes. The use of child soldiers highlights the Legion's disregard for basic ethics and further establishes them as a morally dubious and tyrannical faction within the Mojave. Mick and Ralph's slave trade. First and foremost, this is just a theory that I've heard, but it is quite unhinged, so here it is. This theory states that Freeside's general store, Mick and Ralph's, actually poses as a front to perpetuate the Mojave's slave trade. And while there's no explicit evidence that it is true, there are some things in-game that could potentially indicate Mick and Ralph are conducting some dubious business, in addition to their typical sales. The first piece of evidence is their already shady business practices. In addition to the regular arms and goods that they sell, both Mick and Ralph have secret inventories that they'll only sell to select individuals. For Mick, this mostly consists of special armaments that can't be regularly bought. For Ralph, the most notable item is a fake Vegas Strip passport. Now, even outside the fact that both vendors sell special items to special people, the items themselves indicate some sorts of shady business. While he doesn't sell them, 2 infiltrator assault rifles can be found hanging on his secret inventory wall. Prior to New Vegas, the infiltrator could only be found wielded by Asher's Pit Raiders. The Pit Raiders notoriously use slave labor to achieve their goals and run their economy. On the other hand, the fact that Ralph sells fake strip passports is a major red flag. Normally, the passport ensures that only certain people are allowed access to the strip. The fact that Ralph willingly sells counterfeit passports could indicate their involvement in a wide variety of other illicit activities. And lastly, Mick and Ralph try to maintain business relationships with some shady organizations, namely the Omertas. The Omertas are one of the strip families in New Vegas. They conduct a wide array of illegal activities, including drug trafficking, assassinations, and manufacturing bombs. One of the ways to start the side quest, How Little We Know, is through discovering that the Omertas have recently stopped buying weapons from Mick and Ralph's. Mick and Ralph are both concerned with why this has happened, asking the courier to investigate. If Mick and Ralph's associates with groups like the Omertas, it raises questions about the legitimacy of their business dealings and whether or not they're involved in some shadier activities, like the Mojave slave trade. Fiends Hallucinations. Here's an interesting theory, one that I've not heard before making this iceberg. The Fiends are a raider gang in the Mojave Wasteland known for their extreme aggression, frequent use of chems, and violent tendencies. This theory states that their aggression and violence, rather than just being rooted in lawless human nature, actually stems from chem-induced hallucinations. According to this theory, the constant intake of chems could be causing the Fiends to see frightening visions that others don't. These hallucinations might make them act aggressively and attack anyone who crosses their path. The idea is that the Fiends, in their chem-induced haze, may believe that they are facing terrifying foes, leading them to engage in indiscriminate violence. While it is just a theory, it adds an intriguing alternative explanation regarding the Fiends' behavior in the Mojave Wasteland. They're not just chem-addled bandits, but rather they're witnessing some truly terrifying stuff that just needs to be put down. Sometimes what you see isn't always what's truly there. Do Not Trust Yesman. While at first this may seem like one of those forbidden tier meme entries, do not trust Easy Pete or whatever, I think this theory has a bit of merit. I've touched on it before in my New Vegas independent ending isn't what you think it is video, but Yesman may have some ulterior motives for helping you claim independency over the strip. Yesman is a self-aware and seemingly helpful Securitron who assists the player many times over the course of New Vegas's main quest. Now, this theory suggests that Yesman might have his own motives hidden beneath his agreeable surface. While he claims to be a helpful assistant, some caution may be warranted. Upon completing No Gods, No Masters, the main quest that leads to the independent ending, Yesman pulls you aside and lets you know that he found some code snippets in one of Mr. House's databanks that will let him reprogram his personality to be a little more assertive. He explains that he will be gone for a long while doing these upgrades and bids you farewell. And while at first this may seem like an ordinary course of action for Yesman, it's important to remember that he was initially programmed to be very forthcoming with information and do his best to better the goals of whoever he was working with. So if Yesman were to be reprogrammed to be more assertive, then that would mean he would no longer be a Yesman. It would seem to me that Yesman would go on to achieve his own goals instead of helping his partner. With this being said, maybe Yesman wasn't actually trying to help you with taking over the Mojave, but rather made use of your unending work ethic to rid the Mojave of scum, before eventually going on to rid you from the Mojave. And besides, no one, even a robot designed to be happy, is ever really that happy. Do not trust Yesman. Sensient Tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds are the parts of plants that roll in the wind after they detach from their roots or stems. In New Vegas, they appear as a rough brown ball that rolls around. They're very light, can be picked up, and be pushed. On the technical side, they're classified as world objects, items that appear in the game's environment, but cannot be added to the player's inventory. However, within the files of New Vegas, there exists two variants of tumbleweeds that are not world objects. Rather, they're classified under the creature's denomination, the Wind Brahmin and the radioactive tumbleweed, thus the sentient tumbleweed. What's noteworthy is that these creatures can move on their own and be killed. This means that these tumbleweed variants do not move with the wind or when pushed by the player, but rather they move out of their own free will. Furthermore, if the player were to shoot one of these cut content tumbleweeds, it wouldn't make the metallic noise that, for some reason, typical New Vegas tumbleweeds make, rather they would be killed. Now, are these cut content tumbleweeds the developers' first attempts at making a self-moving tumbleweed? Perhaps. Or are they part of a deeper, mysterious Fallout tumbleweed lore? We will never know. NCR veterans are ghouls. The New California Republic Army is one of the largest forces in the entire wasteland. Their tenacity and drive to make the wasteland a more hospitable place in the face of danger has ensured this. Now, what's interesting about one branch of the NCR Army, the NCR Rangers, is that a large number of veteran members tend to be ghouls. Why is that? Well, as the NCR expands its reaches across the post-apocalyptic wasteland, the toll of warfare and exposure to radiation leaves many veterans marked by ghoulification. Brave men and women dedicated to the cause of the NCR face the relentless challenges of the wasteland. Through battles and conflicts, they are exposed to radiation. Over time, the cumulative effects of radiation take their toll, transforming these once human soldiers into ghouls. And if the radiation or extensive combat doesn't leave them in a grave, then now, as ghouls have prolonged lifespans, they will eventually become the most veteran soldiers of the NCR. You either die an NCR Ranger, or live long enough to see yourself become a ghoulified NCR Veteran Ranger. Such is the way of the wasteland. NCR Vehicles should work. In the lore of the game, the New California Republic should have access to working vehicles. We know that they have the tram that moves troops from Camp McCarran to the Strip, but vehicles like trucks, trains, and vertibirds should be present in the NCR's Mojave campaign. Again, this is known in lore. It's stated in the New Vegas game guide that McCarran has a truck mechanic area dedicated to the repair, maintenance, and service of all NCR trucks in the Mojave. Tire tracks can also be seen quite often in-game, indicating recent use of these vehicles. It is known through doing the Arizona Killer Quest and exploring the Lonesome Road DLC that the NCR had some limited access to vertibirds. Kimball arrives at the Hoover Dam in Bear Force 1, and parts of the Long 15 have plenty of crashed vertibirds. We know that just prior to the start of the game that the NCR was making use of a railway to move supplies into the Mojave. This supply line would have been halted by the NCR Correctional Facility Prison Break. So we know that the NCR has access to vehicles, so why don't we ever see them in action? Well, a big reason would be technical constraints. New Vegas was built using the Gamebryo engine, and while it's quite versatile, games made on this engine, like Fallout 3 or Oblivion, tended to have a litany of technical problems and bugs. Weird workarounds would be implemented by developers to get things done. For example, in Fallout 3, to make the broken steel metro work, the developers made it into a piece of armor to be worn by an NPC, DLC 03 Metro Car Armor. And what's particularly funny is that it's not worn by any random NPC, it's actually worn by the player. You see, by getting in the Metro and turning it on, it activates a script that automatically equips the Metro Car Armor to the player. It then adds an animation where you move along the path of the Metro. How fun. That's the sort of technical genius it takes to get the Fallout 3 Metro to work. To add to that, the developers of New Vegas, Obsidian, weren't very familiar with the Gamebryo engine. In an interview with US Gamer, lead game designer Joshua Sawyer revealed that we had no experience working with that engine. The first person who came here who had experience working on the engine was Jorge Salgado, who was a modder who made Obscuro and Oblivion Overhaul, while the rest of us were completely clueless. So you've got a finicky game engine and a team that's not too comfortable working on said engine. And now you have to somehow get working cars into a game that only had 18 months of development time? No chance in heck that would ever go over smoothly. So in lore, working vehicles do exist. In-game, it would have taken way too many resources for what would likely only add to environmental set pieces and immersion. Easier to have tire tracks and a prison break than to make dozens of NPCs running around wearing truck armor. New Vegas Post Game. The second battle of the Hoover Dam marks the end of Fallout New Vegas, the Courier's story, and decides the future of the Mojave. Years of conflict over the sole owner of the Hoover Dam and the fate of the Strip is resolved in a single playthrough that is a couple dozen hours long. The courier is a quick worker. However, maybe the game wasn't going to end after the second battle of the Hoover Dam. Eurogamer released an article 2 months prior to New Vegas' release discussing the possibility of post-game play after beating the main story quests. Joshua Sawyer would remark that initially we talked about trying to support post-game play, but the changes that can happen at the end of the game are pretty major. This is what it basically came down to. Either have the changes feel really major in the end slides and then have them not be very major after the end of the game, or make them really minor and not that impactful. Jason Bergman, a senior producer for New Vegas, would be quoted as saying, "We tell the full story of every one of your companions through to the end of their lives. And it's weird to do all that and then jump back and say, okay, now you can keep going again." It would seem that the pacing and storytelling would feel off if the courier were to just jump back into the Mojave after having been a part of and experiencing such a major conflict. Sometimes good things just have to come to an end. New Vegas and The Stand. The Stand is a post-apocalyptic dark fantasy novel written by Stephen King and first published in 1978. Now, some avid readers and gamers have noted a few similarities between King's novel and Fallout New Vegas. For starters, both stories are set in the post-apocalyptic Mojave Desert. Both tales have good and evil personified. New Vegas has the NCR and Kaiser, and The Stand has Abigail Fremantle and Randall Flagg. Flagg runs his post-apocalyptic society with an iron fist, similar to Kaiser. Flagg, again like Kaiser, punishes drug and alcohol use by death and makes use of crucifixion as a severe punishment. While there is no confirmation that The Stand was used as an inspiration for the story of New Vegas, it wouldn't surprise me if some aspects of New Vegas were influenced by Stephen King's novel. I think both The Stand and New Vegas are some of the best post-apocalyptic media. First Battle of Hoover Dam Orgy. As mentioned before on previous tiers, you can't really make a New Vegas Iceberg video without talking about Van Buren. As mentioned on previous tiers again, quite a few ideas from Van Buren managed to get recycled into New Vegas. One of these ideas was a conflict between the NCR and Legion over the pre-war relic of the Hoover Dam. In the leaked design documents for Van Buren, it's noted that Kaiser's Legion attempted to take over the Hoover Dam from NCR control. It would be a fierce attack, but ultimately was thwarted by the NCR's stalwart defense. But this series of events wasn't actually the first iteration of the NCR Legion conflict over the dam. Earlier versions of Van Buren were quite a bit out there. According to Chris Avallone during a 2015 Games conference, one of the earliest versions of the Battle of the Hoover Dam was actually an NCR attack, a surprise attack at that. Chris said, "The Battle of the Hoover Dam is the name given to the decisive battle against Kaiser's Legion at Hoover Dam by the NCR 4th Cavalry Division. Taking advantage of a Saturnalia-style orgy in the slaver camp, the NCR forces, guided by intelligence obtained by the NCR Rangers, surrounded the camp, then moved in, killing dozens of drunken slavers as they attempted to defend themselves. This military action was welcomed by almost every settlement east of the Divide, and even other slaver bands who were now able to move in on Kaiser's territory." Last time I spoke about this event, I had to Google what a Saturnalia-style orgy is. I can now confidently say that I know exactly what a Saturnalia-style orgy is. So Saturnalia was essentially Roman Christmas before Christian Christmas. In fact, many people credit the Roman Empire with inventing what we now understand to be Christmas. Nothing says happy holidays better than just boning for a week. But yeah, in the early versions of Van Buren, Kaiser's Legion lost control of the Hoover Dam to the NCR because they were too busy doing the do. I'd imagine that this loss would have been much more embarrassing than Joshua Graham's loss, that's for sure. If Graham got lit on fire and tossed into a canyon for being outwitted, imagine what would happen to the Legion's commanders after this loss. Yikes. Van Buren, New Vegas shared characters. We touched on this a bit in a prior tier, and just moments ago, but New Vegas managed to recycle some aspects of Van Buren and added them into the Mojave Wasteland. There are a handful of notable characters who share names between both games. Let's go over them. In New Vegas, Arcade Gannon is a doctor and scientist working with the followers of the Apocalypse, with ties back to the Enclave. He is a potential companion of the Courier. In Van Buren, he is a former Enclave infantryman who deserted his assignment to join up with the followers of the Apocalypse, who are located at the Hoover Dam settlement. He too would be a recruitable companion. Pretty similar characters, it seems. Joshua Graham, aka the Burned Man, was one of the original founders of the Legion and served as their military commander. After losing the first battle of the Hoover Dam, in a show that demonstrated failure in the Legion was not an option, Kaiser lit his friend on fire and dumped him in the Grand Canyon. Graham would survive, becoming the leader of the Dead Horses of Zion Canyon. In Van Buren, Joshua Graham, aka the Hanged Man, would be the protagonist's first and statistically best companion. That's great, right? The best companion right off the bat. Well, not quite. The Hanged Man would be an extremely evil character, making the protagonist's life pretty awful when it came to diplomatic encounters. The Hanged Man was a murderer, a slaver, and the former right-hand man of Kaiser's Legion. After a failed attack on the Hoover Dam, Kaiser would light Graham on fire and toss him in the Grand Canyon. He would survive this only to be found hanged by the neck at Fort Abandon by Van Buren's protagonist. Similar origin stories between the two games, quite a different tale afterwards. In New Vegas, Alice McLafferty is the current manager of the Mojave's branch of the Crimson Caravan Company. She is a ruthless businesswoman orchestrating strategic and violent takeovers of other small caravan businesses. In Van Buren, she's not a whole lot different. Alice McLafferty, spelled a bit differently, is the head executive of the Crimson Caravan Company at the Hoover Dam settlement. She maintains her ruthless businesswoman persona, supplying weapons and armaments to both sides of the NCR Brotherhood conflict. But she also has some greater aspirations. Her hope, by supplying both sides with weapons, is that it will cause a war of attrition and cause some war fatigue amongst citizens of the NCR. She hopes that this will cause the governor of the NCR, Joseph Dodge, to step down. Once this happens, she plans to blow up the entrance to the Brotherhood's bunker, trapping them inside. This would end the war, and she would come back to the Hoover Dam, touted as a hero who stopped the NCR Brotherhood War. A lot more involved in Van Buren, but still ruthless between both tales. And lastly, before there was Gloria Van Graff leading the Van Graff Silver Rush branch, there was a woman named Frida Van Graff. John Baptiste, when asked about his siblings, explains that we're a wild bunch. There's my sister Frida, who used to run this branch, but she took off to pursue the opportunity of a lifetime, as she puts it. Now in Van Buren, there was set to be a character named Frida Van Graff. She would be the owner of her firearms store, Frida's Firearms. Other Van Graff members, like Jean-Baptiste Cutting, are also mentioned in Van Buren, but just that he's been missing for a while. There you go, the breakdown for some characters that were meant to appear in Van Buren, but ended up being recycled into New Vegas. Gamora Backrooms. Cut content. Cut content. The Gamora Hotel and Casino is a lusty maze of confusion. I don't know about you, but I always get lost in the Gamora. All the hallways look the same, quests take you to random corridors and weird rooms. It sucks. But what if I told you that it was going to be much worse? The Gamora was actually planned to have another floor, a third floor. It can still be found in-game and you can access it through console commands if you'd like. But there are no NPCs and no notable loot. Now, what this results in is a nearly inaccessible, empty floor made up of entirely yellowish walls. Because of this, it's been cheekily dubbed as the Gamora Backrooms. For those who don't know, the Backrooms are a creepypasta based on an image of an unsettling room that was posted to 4chan. It's about how people sometimes no-clip into the Backrooms, A sprawling maze of mono-yellow walls, moldy carpets, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. You can see the comparison, right? Now, the reason why the third floor of the Gamora was cut from New Vegas was for the exact reasons I outlined before. The Gamora, even as it shipped, was large and difficult to navigate. Several quests had to snake through the labyrinth, and having additional levels would actually detract from the experience. The hotel would be too large considering the actual amount of content it got. It took up so much space, so now we have the Gamora backrooms instead. Angry Moon. Roaming around the Big Empty are a series of Securitrons that appear to, after having skipped routine maintenance for a couple centuries, have abandoned their original programming, turning berserk. These hostile bots use their lasers and missile launchers to dispatch any foe in their way. Now, instead of having their displays show a face of a police officer or a soldier, they instead have a strange, distorted face. This face is actually pulled from the cover of sheet music to the song Stingy by Ed Gardenier and J. Fred Health, published in 1904. Scary little moon face, that is. It gives me the creeps. New Vegas playable races. While the canon Fallout titles have only ever let players play as humans, Fallout Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel allowed the player to play as something other than a human. Fallout New Vegas was initially planned to have 3 playable races. The Obsidian CEO was quoted as saying, "Originally we had this idea where the player would be able to choose between 3 races, human, ghoul, and supermutant." However, Obsidian was met with problems immediately in terms of how armor and weapons would work with the different races. And when Obsidian presented this idea to their publishers, Bethesda strongly recommended against doing so, likely worried that spending too much time and resources on this idea wouldn't have a good return on investment. In the end, New Vegas, like those that came before it, launched with a single playable race, the human race. And if I may go on a bit of a rant, I think implementing 3 playable races would most certainly require 3 times the amount of dialogue. The fact of the matter is that I believe characters would treat the protagonist differently depending on what race they are. A ghoul wouldn't be treated the same as a human, wouldn't be treated the same as a supermutant. In order to effectively immerse the player into the world of Fallout, I think characters would need to treat the player characters slightly different depending on if they were a ghoul or supermutant. Is that post-apocalyptic racism? Probably, yeah. But we see this all the time in the franchise. I mean, you can literally harass Grex the Ghoul into having him give over his clothes. Muty bastards is a common term used to describe supermutants. It's in the game. And honestly, it would just feel weird if I played a ghoul and walked into an entirely human settlement and didn't get a few "gah fuck, what are yous" coming my way. Lone Wolf Radio. Lone Wolf Radio is an abandoned trailer that can be found near Prim in the Mojave. It appears to serve as a broadcasting station, as loads of technology and equipment can be found within the rundown trailer. Now, the location itself isn't very noteworthy. It's the associated creepypasta that puts Lone Wolf Radio in this tier. After the release of New Vegas, someone posted their curious investigation into learning more about the Lone Wolf Radio location. They spoke about how upon loading an old save, they found a message written in blood. It said, "Everyone is gone, I am alone." After being thoroughly creeped out, they sought to find more answers about the location. They mentioned how they managed to track down a former Obsidian employee named Thomas, who said the Lone Wolf Radio location was going to tie into a major questline in the game, but was eventually cut. After tuning into your radio at around 2 a.m., you would hear the Lone Wolf Radio DJ spout incomprehensible gibberish and then murder a random person. This process would continue if you ignored the broadcast to the point that they would murder a child. According to Thomas, the plotline would be cut as it became far too graphic for a game like Fallout New Vegas. After some time, the OP received an anonymous email that supposedly contained the cut files for the disturbing quest. The OP would load them into their game, and in typical creepypasta fashion, a lot of incoherent B-movie horror events started to occur. The radio station played what sounded like a real murder, kudo to those voice actors, tally marks and a custom model corpse suddenly appeared in the Lone Wolf trailer, the radio equipment was turned off, and the blood was a higher resolution than what was typical of New Vegas. After closing the game, the OP took a closer look at the folder where they found an image of a dead body that was posed identically to the corpse in-game. The next day, OP reached out to Thomas, concerned about the cut content. Thomas was surprised at what OP reported, because supposedly that wasn't what was cut from the game. Dun dun dun. OP received a fake file from some apparent psycho. OP would go on to start up New Vegas again, this time encountering the NPC of the radio DJ along with a child. The DJ would be holding a sledgehammer, and just as they're about to bring down the hammer on the child, the game crashes. I think he hit the wrong thing. OP then proceeds to go onto some forum and write up the events he just witnessed. There you have it, the cliff notes for the Lone Wolf Radio creepypasta. Honestly, looking back on it, while it was quite scary when I was a kid, holy guacamole, this is some dog-level creative writing. Sure, if this actually happened to me, I'd piss my pants, but come on, the OP really just fell for a scam email and wrote about it. Isn't that like internet rule number 1? Don't click on links that you might not trust? Come on now. What's fun is that the Lone Wolf Radio creepypasta became so widespread that Joshua Sawyer was asked about it during a Twitch stream. Of course, he said that it's completely made up. All that stuff about Lone Wolf Radio is completely made up. The Nuka Breaker and Nuka Break. Fallout Nuka Break was a fan-made web series set in the Fallout universe. It started out as a film that was released on YouTube in early 2011. The series follows a trio of ragtag adventurers as they try to survive the wasteland while finding a perfectly ice-cold Nuka-Cola. Its popularity allowed for the creators to turn it into a full-on web series, with its first episode being released in September 2011. It was even popular with the game's developers, with Bethesda calling it great work, and Obsidian adding a reference to the series into New Vegas. The latter has a neat tale with it. After the short film had been released, but before the series had been released, Obsidian released promo images for the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC. One image caught the attention of the Nuka Break series, a weaponized Nuka-Cola sign that reads, "Take a Nuka Break." Thinking that the sign was rather cool, Nuka Break added the sign into an episode of their series, as seen here. The sign's inclusion in Nuka Break served as a reference to the Nuka Breaker weapon, but unbeknownst to the creators of Nuka Break, the Nuka Breaker weapon in the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC was actually a reference to the Nuka Break series all along. In the words of the show's creator, it was all one big circle of nodding. The fastest ending. Ever since the release of New Vegas, speedrunners around the world have been attempting to complete the game in record times, get patched up by Mitchell, reload dash to the strip, kill Benny, and go talk the Legate into standing down, all under 10 minutes. It's easy, right? Well, what if there could have been a faster any percent speedrun? The Mojave Outpost serves as the boundary between the New California Republic-controlled land and the Mojave Wasteland. It's typically the first stop for many caravans coming from the NCR en route to New Vegas and beyond. The player is unable to cross through the gate to the Long 15, as it would mean that they'd be leaving the Mojave. But the Obsidian developers considered adding an early game over ending with the Mojave Outpost. On a Something Awful forum post, Josh Sawyer wrote, "For a while we joked around that we should have something at the Mojave Outpost where you can ask Major Knight to let you go back to the NCR. He would say something like, 'Well, okay, but we can't let you back through. Roll credits.' A not-so-ambitious courier would get patched up from Doc Mitchell, and instead of chasing down the man who shot them, would just say, 'Nah, not worth my time,' and head back home to the NCR. Game over. I'm sure reload dashing from Goodsprings to the Mojave Outpost would be like a sub 1 minute run. And that wraps up Tier 4 of the New Vegas Iceberg. From the backrooms to some pretty wild theories, I hope this tier was as unhinged as I imagined it would be. Next week will be the final tier, Tier 5, or what I call the ultimate tier. That's all from me today, folks. If you liked the video, be sure to share and subscribe. Join the Discord. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
God damn it, ambush! Cover people! Watch yourselves!
I don't deserve this! My people don't even work! Why the fuck you hire me?